All right, so thank you and welcome to this afternoon's session on podcasting science. My name is Amber Fitzsimmons. I'm the chair of the Department of Physical Therapy, Rehab Science. I am one of the many podcasters at UCSF, across UCSF, focusing on PT, physical therapy paths and career opportunities that students and our alumni might be interested in learning about. So I'm very excited to be sitting here with my colleagues across UCSF to talk about the medium of podcasting and the way that we each use it to help audience learn about health sciences, build communities, learn about alumni career paths. So we use podcasting for a lot of different reasons. And so we're hoping that people are interested in podcasting. Do people listen to podcasts? Yes. Okay, woo, good. But before we get started, because we are a panel of creatives, we have to, well, we don't have to, but we've opted to do something that's familiar to Dr. Alex Smith here. We thought we would, because it's post-lunch this afternoon, you've had some sugar, you might be taking it down a notch. We thought we would just start with an interesting way of recognizing all that's going around in the world right now, and we're going to take it away.
Right. So I'm Alex Smith, and I co-host the Geri Pal podcast, which is about geriatrics and palliative care. And at the start of every podcast, we have a different guest every week. We asked our guests for a song request. And then I learned that song a little bit in advance, and I play just like the verse and the chorus at the beginning of each podcast and a little bit more at the end. And our guests are usually like academics who've written some important paper in JAMA or whatever. And they're used to giving like a 50-minute grand rounds, which makes like uninterrupted, right? That makes for a terrible podcast. So we play this song and they're like, this is different. Takes them to a different place. So I asked for a song request today, and Peter suggested It's the End of the World as We Know It. They're gonna put the lyrics up here, if we could have the lyrics up there. And I would love it if you all could sing along. I'll try not to play it too fast so we can sing it. Here we go. That's great, it starts with an earthquake, birds and snakes, an aeroplane, and Lenny Bruce is not afraid. Eye of a hurricane, listen to yourself churn, world serves its own needs, don't misserve your own needs, speed it up a notch, grunt, so strength, the ladder starts to clatter with the fear of height, down, height, wire in a fire representing 7 games and a government for hire and a combat site. Nectar wasn't coming in a hurry with the furies breathing down your neck. Team by team reporters baffled, Trump tethered, cropped, and look at that low plane, fine. Then, overflow, population, common proof what it'll do. Save yourself, serve yourself, world serves its own needs. Listen to your heartbeat, dummy with the raptured and the reverend and the right. You vitriolic, patriotic, slam fight, bright light, feeling pretty sight. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. And I feel fine. All right.
Thank you so much, Alex. That was great. So we're going to go ahead and start with some introductions. So each individual panel member will do an introduction. They're going to introduce themselves, their role at UCSF, and the title of their podcast. And then going to ask, what is the core purpose of your podcast, and what do you hope listeners walk away with? So why don't we just start right here?
Sure. My name is Ergo Mitchell. I manage digital communications for the School of Medicine Dean's Office, and part of that is producing The Spark, Medical Education for Curious Minds, which is mostly run by our wonderful student hosts. I think the goal of our podcast is to really sort of humanize the people behind medical careers. It's really interesting getting it from the student perspective too, as they go on this journey, and have to give a little shout out to our graduating hosts, Chloe Salas and Paul Branfenbrenner, who started when I think they were MS1 and MS2 maybe, So it's been really incredible to sort of watch their journey as they learn all about the career that they're embarking on. So apologies, what was the second part of the question?
Yeah, just, I think you got it though, which is what do you hope listeners will take away?
Oh yeah, I really do hope that listeners come away with a greater sense of the humanity of our people, both student and faculty. I think sometimes big institutions like ours can be very intimidating and feel very, I don't know, sort of not stuffy, but maybe stuffy. And I hope that this podcast is one way that they can really see that everyone is just a person and everyone is learning as they go and figuring out life one step at a time.
Hi everyone, I'm Diana Nguyen. I am representing the School of Dentistry. I'm a general dentist by training, and I am currently the chief of the Division of Clinical General Dentistry at SOD. My podcast is called Project Confidence, Dents spelled D-E-N-T-S for dentist. And it is, it's a little bit of a play on words and double entendre, if you will, because it's core purpose, my co-host and I, my co-host is my best friend from dental school, Dr. Amrita Patel. She's a private practice owner and also a very active public speaker in dentistry who practices in New York. I started my career as an associate in private practice, worked on a military base and in a DSO for like a minute, and then eventually transitioned into full-time academia. And so we have had very divergent paths in dentistry, but we keep in touch all the time, and we're in constant communication. I was talking to her this morning, actually. And so we've had conversations about dentistry and all the things that we wish that we had learned after we graduated from school. Especially for me as an academic, I work with students full-time every day on the clinic floor, and they're always telling me after they graduate, we learned so much here at UCSF, but I kind of wish that they had gone over a little bit more about certain topics, sort of practice readiness, and also a little bit more of that human side of what it means to be a person treating other people. And so Amrita and I have been having these conversations for close to 20 years now. And so we thought, what if we let people in on those conversations? And so our target demographic is really new dentists, early career graduates, but also we've found through our analytics that we have been attracting dentists at all different stages of their careers because everyone wants a little bit more insight into what it means to practice dentistry today. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Great. I'm Peter Turnbaugh. I am a professor in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology. You might have seen my discovery talk yesterday, so I'm back. My podcast is called Science is Fun, and it's a long-form interview podcast. We interviewed Stephen Hauser, who also gave a talk yesterday, if you're interested. And we really spend usually an hour or two kind of going into the weeds of the person's career and their exciting research that they're doing today and kind of how they got to where they are. And yeah, I guess what I would like people to really take from it is, in the title, I want them to appreciate that, we love what we do and that process of thinking and talking about science is really exciting and fun to do. And I also I wanted to kind of give people a window into what real scientists talk like. So we don't really dumb it down. It's very much, real scientists talking to each other. And so if you're interested in that, check us out.
Yes, again, I'm Alex Smith, and I co-host the Jerry Powell podcast, and I'm professor of medicine at UCSF in the Division of Geriatrics. And I'm an alumni of UCSF School of Medicine. I was in the joint medical program, graduated in 2002. And my wife's over there. She's an 2001 graduate with her friend Doris, 25th year for them. Jerry Powell is a podcast about geriatrics and palliative care, and our target audience are clinicians who care for older adults or people living with serious illness. And so it's a very targeted niche, and we're fairly well known within that niche. We just recorded our 400th podcast. We did that Hot Ones style. Anybody familiar with the YouTube Hot Ones? episodes where you get people ask us questions. It was like an Ask Me Anything podcast, and then you had to have chicken wings with progressively hotter hot sauces. And so by the time I got to like the million Schofield unit intensely hot sauces, like I'm giving off the cuff answers, I'm sweating, like heart's beat racing, I'm terrified of the next bite. So we try to have a lot of fun with geriatrics and palliative care topics, as you can see with the song. And we try to make it accessible to most of our listeners are practicing clinicians. They're not researchers. So we'll take like this article and we'll try to make it really accessible to clinicians so they understand like why is this important and what's the bottom line for their clinical practice or health policy.
And to riff off of what Alex said, we will be taking questions from the audience. So if you have a question, burning question, I didn't even mean to say that. But if you have a question you'd like to ask after the next question or two, I'll ask the audience so that we can take your questions as well. The next question is for Alex and Ergo. Why was podcast the right format for you for what you wanted to share?
I think it makes sense sort of just logically with so much of the medical experience is rooted in oral traditions anyway. And I think for us, we really sort of wanted to emphasize the co-learning part of being a medical student. Like these conversations that you have sort of off the cuff outside of the classroom with mentor figures is an essential part of the job. So I think it totally made sense to send MS1s to interview longtime faculty as they start their careers. So yeah, I want to say it was really intentional, but it was kind of it just made sense to us, I think.
Yeah, that connection to the oral history.
Yeah, so we started as a blog in 2009, and in 2009, people were blogging, right? That was the medium. And around that time, there's a lot of tension between geriatrics and palliative care. Like the people in palliative care felt like, I don't really need to do geriatrics fellowship. I've taken care of older people. People in geriatrics felt like palliative care was kind of stealing their fellows. But we felt like, we have so much more to gain by working together than at odds. So we tried to be that bridge between the fields. And we wrote weekly content. It's really hard to keep writing weekly content year after year. And we did that till 2016. And then people weren't blogging as much anymore. One of the sad things today is fewer people read, but people listen. And when you listen, you can multitask. You can listen on the way to work. You can listen at the gym. You can listen while you're doing dishes. So we started a podcast in 2016. And we stuck to the medium and tried to build that community. I think people appreciate hearing our voices, There's something more, human, and they feel like when I meet people at meetings, they say, I feel like I know you. I've spent, hundreds of hours listening to you. And so there's something about that, relational aspect that you get from a podcast that you don't necessarily get from the written word. So I think podcast's a terrific medium. We've gone from blogging to podcasting, but we're not tied to the medium. We're tied to the message. And so who knows what the future will bring and what the next medium will be.
I think it's vlogging, isn't it? It's when you do video on YouTube. And
we do that too. We are on YouTube now.
Oh, so you have vlogged.
Yeah, and Spotify. Okay. Yeah, we're trying to. Yeah.
Great. Excellent. Next one is for Diana. You've talked about connections to dentistry in the field, maybe career paths or a community that you're building. How has your podcast helped build communities in ways that you didn't fully anticipate?
I think we never set out to have to try to find followers. We didn't say we want to get a whole bunch of people to listen to us and become fans of our podcast. I think Amrita and I said we're hoping to create just a space where you could have real conversations about things that early career dentists and even dental students, as they're preparing to leave school, are struggling with, whether it is imposter syndrome, they're worried about their finances, like how to start a practice or lead a team and be successful. So much of dentistry, and probably like other healthcare professions, the traditional path has been very linear. It's just you study hard, you go to school, you do residency, and then you go out and you get a job. And in dentistry especially, it typically is solo private practice ownership. It's still the leading reason why people go into dentistry and the leading means of practice today. But the generations are changing, and what they want is different. And now what we're seeing is that people are really looking, searching for a way to connect to other people who can guide them and offer advice. And the thing about social media is that even though it does allow us to be connected, it's such a curated mode of displaying only the highlights of what you're doing and only the very best of what you're seeing. And Amrita and I kind of wanted to break that down a little bit and say, the manner in which we have developed confidence as clinicians and as professionals has been through struggling and learning from our mistakes. And so we found that our listeners really identify with that. And the feedback that we've gotten from that is that they appreciate hearing how we've struggled and how we've gotten past those obstacles.
A lot about that vulnerability piece.
Right.
Yeah. Does anybody in the audience have questions before we go? I have a whole list, but we also want to be interested in what you might be interested in. We have a couple of microphones in the back. Anyone? Here we go.
My question is for Dr. Turnbaugh. How do you choose the topics that you put on your podcast? And do you feel like there's always a warm, fuzzy reception for deep science topics? Are any of them more popular than others?
Yeah, that's a great question. We were talking about those before this panel, and yeah, my intention was really that it would be kind of all areas of science. I wanted to talk, and mainly this was selfishly, I like to learn about new topics, and so I was hoping to talk to physicists and chemists and people that study all different areas of science that I'm not an expert in. It turns out those people don't like to email me back. As you'll see if you go to the feed, I talk to a lot of microbiome people. They're my friends, they recognize me. And so, yeah, I'm trying to kind of break out of the mold. One way that I've done that is, by taking advantage of UCSF and the network here. And so, if I email another faculty at UCSF, even if they're in a different field, they usually are responsive. And then I've also partnered with BioHub, which is a kind of joint effort between Stanford, Berkeley, and UCSF to try to draw in those people. But yeah, I would love ideas for how to kind of get to people that are, maybe on the other coast that don't want to come on the show yet.
That's great. Peter, kind of going off of that, as you've brought on your various guests and talked about deep science, is there anything that you've learned as a host about your field, your audience, that you didn't expect when you started?
Yeah, and I realized I didn't answer the second part of the question, which is, does everyone want deep science? No, I think. So yeah, I would say we're in a pretty narrow niche. It's surprising who does, listen though. Like you said, I run into people at conferences that are, excited about the show. I do think it's largely a podcast, by scientists for scientists, and that was by design. But hopefully it's also entertaining and interesting for those that aren't too deep in the weeds. Can you say the question?
Yeah, I was just curious about something that you didn't fully expect when you started engaging in it.
Right. I think what I found very comforting is that, I tend to invite people that have done something very impressive and are, have gotten a lot of accolades, in addition to trying to like feature up and coming people. But, you kind of learn through all these conversations that everyone has gone through the same struggles that I have. And so that, it was really great to kind of hear from people that you really admire that, they're even still maybe struggling and every day is not as easy as the next. And so, I think that really made me feel better about our work every day and that we're all kind of in the fight together.
Thank you. Alex, how do you think podcasts help translate complex or specialized knowledge into something people can actually engage with and remember, especially in your case, if they're not clinicians?
Yeah. Well, most of our target audience are clinicians, though we do have researchers, a few members of the lay public who listen. And part of the problem is today, like if you look at it, you open the journal, you read some article, the methods are incredibly complex, and they're only getting more complex, right? And so it's really hard for the average clinician who's not a researcher to understand what's going on here. And so when we bring the authors of these studies on, we ask them, why was this important to you? And sometimes it's a clinical story, sometimes it's a personal message, sometimes it's a health policy issue. But it really, brings home the importance of this work to that individual. And sometimes stories trump data, right? So we start with those stories, we talk in broad brushstrokes about the methods and the results, and then we move on quickly to the importance of this for clinical practice. And we do probe, we ask some challenging questions about the limitations of this research. And it's just great to be able to engage like a journal club style discussion, but you actually have the author there and you can ask them directly, well, what do you think about this limitation? And who is this for? Who does this study apply to? Are we ready now to prescribe X or Y or Z? Or are we not there yet? So I think that's kind of, our purpose. People these days, I think, crave that sort of pre-digested material, and they can then go back to the original source article if they want more, right? But they appreciate having somebody's take on it, having some discussion, debate, understanding that there are multiple sides and multiple viewpoints on the same pieces of data.
Great. And Diana, how about for you? How do you think, and I'm not sure your conversations in terms of they get into the complexity of dentistry and the science of it, but how does that appeal to your audience? And that trying to decipher that complexity of information?
I think the thing that helps the most is that we are trying to distill all of that information down into very digestible sound bites, and we're asking the same questions that any person would ask about dentistry, and then trying to break it down and unpack how what it is, why anyone should care about it, why is it important, and then how to explain it to someone else in a way that, for instance, if we're talking to patients about a particular type of therapy, a new type of procedure, explaining, trying to convince a patient to accept topical fluoride application, and understanding water fluoridation and why it's it matters so much to dental professionals. We really try to take the perspective of someone who maybe doesn't understand dentistry, and then we walk through why it is that it would be a complex topic to understand, and then how to strategies for being able to convey the importance of that information to anyone who is new to dentistry or is maybe new to speaking to patients, new to treatment planning, new to to guiding patients to accept care.
It's really incredible. You do a wide range of topics.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So we are, I would say that we are not nearly as science heavy as some of the other podcasts that are represented here. Most of our discussions are about career planning, and then a lot of the emotional, mental, and just human aspects of what it means to practice dentistry today.
That's great.
Yeah.
Great. Or take a small break from the audience, or not small break from, oh, we've got one in the back already. Thank you. We'll take a question.
Hi, Mike Schmitz, Medicine 86. This is an analogous situation, but for a while, my daughter had a job with Business Insider on their science team where they were pitching, basically they were like animated podcasts, and they would put them online. And she was always asking me, what do you think? Do you have any ideas? And I'd throw something back at her. The stuff that really got the hits, which is how they were graded, was things that were medical and had an answer. So head lice, that video went berserk, I mean, of course it had fantastic animation stuff to go with it. Anything to do with teeth got major hits, even if it was gnashing teeth or, weird stuff like that. In a comparison, I pitched the idea when it was discovered there were microplastics blowing in the air over the Swiss Alps. That got rejected by the committee. They said, look, nobody wants to hear about what sounds like a terrible problem that there's no answer for. So no, that one got rejected. Do you see that kind of thing with your podcast? Do you get more attention with the kind of stuff that has some sort of solution or preventative for, say, the common person that's listening?
That's such a great question, because we talked right before we were starting about the specificity of what you're going to cover on a podcast versus what's clickbait, what people want to hear. So we just had this conversation. So does anybody particularly want to speak to that?
Sure. I think mostly our podcast is like Diana's, where it's very, it's the journey they're on. It's not really the science, it's the spirit of it. But we did have one of our hosts did a mini series where she was able to help at an ophthalmology clinic in Nepal. And so I think it was 3 or 4 episodes. And I was thinking, this is really niche. They're talking about, how they do procedures there versus how they do it here. And it was really very in the weeds as far as like what we were doing up to the time. And so I was kind of thinking, like, this is super interesting to me. Obviously, we'll put it out, but I was wondering how our audience would react, given that everything else was so kind of philosophical up to that point. But it actually had great uptake and really good reviews, and people reached out about it, which doesn't always happen for us. So it was really interesting, and I think that one was more like bookended. Like, it was a complete story with a beginning, middle, and an end, versus a lot of our episodes that are kind of lofty and heady. So it's interesting that you brought that up, because I don't think I had made that connection particularly.
Yeah. Anybody here from School of Pharmacy alumni? Yes. Good. Great. So some of our most popular podcasts are with pharmacist guests. Podcasts about deprescribing. We had one called Tramadont, about tramadol, reasons not to prescribe tramadol. We had one about overuse of gabapentin, which is like really on the rise. That was our most popular podcast within the last few years. Those tend to be really popular, and so we try to feed that need, which we sense from the community. At the same time, we also want to push people to think about other things they might not have considered relevant to geriatrics or palliative care. Like we inject a lot of bioethics content. We make sure that we have guests who might be studying like smaller groups of people, like indigenous, like palliative care in indigenous communities, for example, things like that. So we are sensitive to you don't want to like worship too heavily at the altar of clicks and downloads and all that, because that path leads to unethical sort of behavior and loss of confidence in trust in your podcast. So we both have to be responsive to them, but also sometimes the audience doesn't know what they need. And so we try to, brainstorm new, fresh ideas and directions that they may not have considered.
Yeah, and I would say, our podcast is definitely more science than medicine, and I think the general lesson that you learn from all of these interviews is that we don't know anything. And, and so, we invite, really renowned people on the show. And, like if you read their papers or if you go to a seminar, you might think, okay, they've got it all figured out. But I think actually what's fun about the conversation is that you're kind of pushing the boundaries of knowledge. And they have all these questions. And I think Ron Krauss said this during our interview, where he's an expert in nutrition, and he told me, as you know, the more you learn about nutrition, the less you know. And so, it was really fascinating to hear, really somebody who's like at the forefront, acknowledging that, like, oh, maybe we don't know what to eat, and we go into details of how he's trying to figure that out and what the biggest opportunities are. So,
great. I think we have another couple questions. We got some great questions here in the front second row. Your questions are better than mine, so I'm going to defer to the experts out here.
Thank you. Mahtab Jafari, PharmD class of 94. I'm a professor at UCI, and I also direct a center called Healthspan Sciences, UCI Center for Healthspan Sciences, and I also run a basic science lab. I understand that we have to educate our colleagues. We attend conferences, we give lectures. But recently, I'm realizing more than ever that as scientists, we also have to educate the community in a language that they understand. So I feel like most of my public presentations are about debunking what some of the podcasters are saying about science, and they're not really scientists. But I feel like I'm just correcting them, and I'm making the language a little bit more accessible to public. So I love what you're doing, Alex and Peter, and you kept saying that your audience is, scientists and physicians and healthcare providers, but I think it would be great to maybe create like a sub podcast and, just talk to public and make science accessible to public.
Mm-hmm.
So, perfect question. And so my follow-up question to that comment was, in a time when trust in science is so critical, how do you approach translating complex ideas that are scientifically sound for the public? And in what ways has your podcast helped build both trust and sense in the community? And so, Alex, should we start with you?
Sure. To be sure, there are major issues in trust with science today, trust in things like vaccines, public health measures, in pandemics. And our little podcast focused on geriatrics and palliative care that's directed at clinicians is not going to have a huge impact. We try and have an impact within our community by bringing on people who may disagree about the science or about the ethics, right? So for example, I'll give you an example. Medical aid in dying is a wedge issue in palliative care and geriatrics, right? Some people feel very strongly that if you're at the end of life, you should have the ability to get a prescription, to have control over the means and timing of the end of your life. And other people feel like that it is a slippery slope that leads to euthanasia and other potentially unethical behavior. And we have had several podcasts about that from people across the spectrum. And one of our most listened to podcasts, and I think this probably went beyond our clinical audience to the lay public, was from comparing medical aid in dying in California to Canada, right? We have the same population size. We started legalized medical aid in dying in 2016 at the same time. In California, the number of people who have utilized medical aid in dying has been about 1,000. In Canada, it started 1,000. It went up to over 20,000. So it's now like 1 out of every 20 or 25 people in Canada dies from medical aid in dying, where it's typically administered via euthanasia. We had guests on from Canada who were proponents of medical aid in dying at the time it was legalized and helped set up medical aid in dying in their health systems, and now are deeply concerned that it's gone too far, and that they're worried about new measures to legalize medical aid in dying for children, for people with serious mental illness. And we talked about it, right, I think what we try and do to rebuild trust within our community across these people who are so deeply divided and have entrenched positions is uncover that complexity, that nuance, that and respectfully have a debate, right? Model respectful dialogue about these divisive issues in a time of intense polarization.
Thank you. Anybody else on trusted science and how you're thinking about that when podcasting? I think it's a great question. I do not do deep science there. Actually, I'm talking about in PT Path, we're talking with alumni about their career trajectories, with the goal of getting a lot of people on that are doing non-linear career trajectories. Some people in physical therapy that have gone into advocacy or research. A lot of newer physical therapists are interested in going into industry, doing a lot of the tech work and the AI and other wearables. And so the goal was for our podcast to really broaden how people thought of physical therapy careers. And so doesn't get exactly on the trust in science from my perspective, but certainly about the ways in which physical therapists engage with the broader public on health and wellness. But I saw one other question over here, and then I'll ask the final, I think. So right in the front.
Thank you. So going back to the trust, in order to gain validity, you use your role at UCSF. Is there any conflict with the university, and how do you manage that?
Anybody?
Yeah, I mean, it's been fine for us. Yeah, I guess I was worried about that when we started the podcast, that, the chancellor would come after me or something. They've been very supportive, yeah. We're not getting a lot of financial support from UCSF, but they, they give us a thumbs up, and they allow us to keep going, which is great. I do wish there was more kind of institutional support for this kind of thing, and that it would not just be kind of grassroots, but that we would have kind of formal programs to get faculty and trainees more actively involved in podcasting. I think that would be a great initiative.
Around the time that we started a blog, we asked our it was then chief of medicine, Bob Wachter, if he thought that was a good idea, and he loved it because he had a blog himself. He's very social media friendly. Yeah. And he's been on our podcast several times, most recently to talk about his new book, A Giant Leap, about artificial intelligence in healthcare. So having support of leadership at UCSF has been incredibly beneficial for us. And to try to avoid conflicts, like my co-host Eric Wadera and I do not take money for this podcast. We do take donations, and we have CME. All that money goes to our producer and to hosting the website and the podcast, those fees. That's a great question, yeah. But there have been other podcasts, like Vinay Prasad was at UCSF before he was at FDA, and he had a podcast that was very prominent and had very controversial views.
We do reach out to the offices of that be and run our ideas by them and get permission for it. At least that's the way we've approached it. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that to echo what they've said is in terms of their experience, is that the response has really just been supportive. Our podcast was not started as something that was a UCSF podcast. I just happened to work here, and I happened to have I was going to say free time, but my boss is standing in the back. I want him to know that I don't really have a whole lot of free time. and so it was, it was a need to have a creative outlet and an opportunity to spend more time, creating something meaningful with my best friend that also was going to be meaningful to our community and our profession. And so, yeah, I actually don't ever mention that I teach at UCSF. If you look at our website or our social media, there's no mention of me being a faculty member here. I would never lie if someone asked me outright. And I have had people who reach out to me through, direct message on Instagram or other means, and they'll ask, they find out where I work, they track me down. But it's never, I'm not leading with the fact that I teach and work here and am part of patient care here and research here. It just so happens that that my role here has been one that allows me to do this incredible work in the dental profession and to be part of a great university. So. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
So the last one's kind of a fun one. What is the most uncomfortable thing you've ever said on mic, and would you take it back?
Oh, me first. Well, thankfully, I am mostly behind the scenes, so the most embarrassing thing I've ever said on mic is yet to come.
Okay, we have to listen then.
I don't know. Because this podcast is a labor of love between myself and my best friend, I think we do go off on tangents sometimes. So most recently, we went off on we were talking about, I don't remember the content. I think we were talking about dental service organizations and their whether or not they influence treatment planning and diagnosis patterns with new graduates and their employees. And somehow that went off on a tangent, and then we were debating between whose side we were on, Victoria Beckham or Nicola Peltz. So I'm Team Posh, in case anyone wants to know.
Yeah, I guess I can't remember if it was me or the guest, but we were recording in, I think, February of 2020, talking about this new virus, SARS-CoV-2, and I think this is not on the episode, I trimmed it out, but we had a long discussion about how it's no big deal and things are gonna be fine. And then I think it was the next week I got an email from UCSF saying to stay home. So.
Because I sing a song at the beginning and end of the podcast, sometimes I go back and listen, and I'm like, oh boy, that was terrible. I can't do that anymore, especially as we got bigger. So now I pre-record the songs for people who listen to the audio only. If you watch YouTube, you still see the live version, mistakes and all. Yeah, I regret some of those early recordings that are still out there.
Thank gosh for editing, right?
Right.
Anyway, thank you so much for joining us today and our conversation about podcasting as a medium. And if anybody has any questions, we'd love to talk to you. Or if you have your own podcast, we'd love to learn about that too. And thank you for taking your time today.
Yeah. Can we do a little more, It's the End of the World?
Sure.
We have the lyrics
Let's do
up
it.
there for the last two slides. All right, here, if you could go forward, it's keep going. It starts with 6 o'clock. There you go, all right. 6 o'clock TV hour, don't get caught in foreign tower, slash and burn, return, listen to yourself churn, lock 'em in, uniform and book, burning blood, letting every motive escalate, automotive center aid, light a candle, light a motive, step down, watch your hail, crush, oh no, this means no fear, cavalier, renegade and steer clear, turn 'em in a tournament of lies, offer me solutions, offer me alternatives, and I decline. It's the end of the world as we know it. Let's hear ya. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's
Thank you.